What's it doing here?
Waiting to be installed.
Right next to the...
He was one of the brightest faces on American television in the 1,970 seconds. Every week, millions tuned in to watch him make the country laugh. His smile was familiar, his voice was everywhere, and yet, in the final hours of his life, Freddie Prinze was completely alone. In the early morning darkness of a Los Angeles apartment, the laughter was gone. The phones that once rang non-stop with agents, producers, and fans were silent. Outside, Hollywood was still asleep, unaware that one of its youngest and biggest stars was standing at the edge of something irreversible. How does a two-year-old man, at the absolute peak of fame, arrive at a night like this? What really happened in the final hours before the gunshot that stunned the nation? Was it a sudden decision, or the inevitable end of a pressure cooker that had been building for years? Behind the sitcom's success, the magazine covers, and the applause, there was another story unfolding quietly. A story of exhaustion, of legal battles and personal collapse, of a young man who rose faster than anyone expected and fell with almost no one noticing the warning signs. Tonight, we slow time down. We step into the final hours of Freddie Prinze's life. We trace the path that led him from television's brightest spotlight to a dark, silent room. And we ask the question Hollywood rarely wants to answer. What happens when fame arrives before you are ready to survive it? The news broke quietly at first, then all at once. In the early hours of the 29th of January 1977, word began to spread through newsrooms, radio stations, and television studios across the United States. Freddie Prinze had been rushed to UCLA Medical Center with a gunshot wound to the head. Within hours, doctors confirmed what many could not yet accept. He was dead. For the public, the shock was immediate and profound. Freddie Prinze was not a fading star or a troubled veteran of Hollywood. He was the face of a generation's laughter. At just 22 years old, he was starring in one of the most popular sitcoms on American television. Chico and the Man had made him a household name almost overnight. To many viewers, he felt young, energetic, and invincible. Television networks interrupted regular programming. Newspapers rushed out special editions. Radio hosts struggled to keep their composure as they read the headlines. Freddie Prinze dead at 22. The words felt unreal, almost obscene. How could someone so young, so successful, so visibly alive, be gone so suddenly? Hollywood reacted with a mix of disbelief and quiet panic. Producers, agents, and fellow performers were stunned not only by the loss, but by what it represented. If someone like Freddie Prinze could collapse so completely, what did that say about the system they were all part of? Comedians and actors who had watched his meteoric rise spoke in hushed tones. Some remembered his raw talent, his uncanny timing, his ability to light up a room. Others admitted they had sensed something darker beneath the surface: fatigue, anxiety, a constant pressure to deliver, but had never imagined it would end like this. Fans gathered outside television studios and hospital entrances, clutching newspapers and handwritten notes. Many said the same thing. He had made them laugh during difficult times. He had felt like a friend in their living rooms every week. And now, without warning, he was gone. Almost immediately, questions began to surface. Was this truly suicide? Was it an accident? How could someone at the height of fame feel so hopeless? Reporters began digging into his personal life, his marriage, his legal troubles, and the intense workload he had carried for years. What initially appeared to be a shocking but simple tragedy quickly revealed itself as something more complicated. Freddie Prinze's death was not just a personal loss. It was a cultural rupture, a moment that forced America to confront the hidden cost of success, especially for someone barely old enough to understand the weight of it. And as the headlines multiplied and the tributes poured in, one uncomfortable truth began to emerge. This was not a sudden collapse. This was the final moment of a story that had been quietly unraveling for a long time, To understand how Freddie Prinze reached that final night, you have to rewind far beyond the sitcom sets and studio lights back to a childhood shaped by instability, identity struggles, and a constant search for belonging. Freddie Prinze was born in 1954 inches, New York City, the son of a Hungarian immigrant father and a Puerto Rican mother. His parents' relationship was volatile, and their marriage ended when Freddie was still young. The separation left deep emotional scars. His father, who struggled with his own mental health, died by suicide years later, a fact that would haunt Freddie in ways few around him fully understood. As a child, Freddie learned early how to read a room. Humor became both a shield and a weapon, a way to diffuse tension, to gain approval, to survive. By his teenage years, he was already performing stand-up comedy, often drawing on his mixed heritage, his family life, and his insecurities. Audiences loved him. Laughter came easily. Understanding, less so. By the early 1970s, Freddie Prinze was part of the booming stand-up comedy scene. Nightclubs became his second home. He was young, sharp, and fearless on stage. His routines were fast, observational, and deeply personal, even when disguised as jokes. Industry insiders began to take notice. Agents saw potential. Producers saw ratings. Then came the role that changed everything. In 1974, Freddie was cast as Chico Rodriguez on Chico and the Man. The show was an instant hit. For the first time, a young Latino comedian was front and center on a major American sitcom. The cultural significance was enormous. So was the pressure. Suddenly, Freddie Prinze was everywhere. Television appearances, magazine interviews, fan mail by the thousands. The schedule was relentless. Long hours on set were followed by promotional appearances and stand-up performances at night. There was little rest, and almost no privacy. Publicly, he was marketed as carefree and charismatic, the embodiment of youthful success. Privately, the demands were overwhelming. He was expected to carry not just a show, but a representation. Expectations piled up faster than he could process them. As his fame grew, so did the cracks. Freddie struggled with anxiety and insomnia. He began using substances to cope, a common but dangerous solution in an industry that offered applause but little support. The laughter that once felt liberating started to feel like an obligation. Marriage did not bring stability. His relationship with actress Katherine Cochran became strained under the weight of fame and constant scrutiny. Arguments escalated. Trust eroded. Eventually, the marriage collapsed, leading to a bitter separation and legal disputes over custody of their young son. The legal battles were brutal. Court dates, lawyers, and paperwork invaded what little personal space Freddie had left. He felt trapped financially, emotionally, and professionally. The same fame that had lifted him out of obscurity now seemed to be closing in from every direction. Behind the scenes of a wildly successful television show, Freddie Prinze was unraveling. Friends later recalled a young man who oscillated between manic energy and deep despair. There were moments of hope, followed by crushing lows. The warning signs were there, but in an era that barely acknowledged mental health, they were often dismissed or ignored. By the time the audience laughed at Chico's jokes each week, Freddie was already exhausted. The road to his final hours had begun long before that last night in Los Angeles. It was paved with applause, expectations, and a growing sense that he was losing control of his own life. And as the pressure continued to build, the fall became not just possible but tragically likely. As Freddie Prinze's public image soared, his private world began to shrink. Success did not bring stability, it brought exposure. Every weakness was amplified, every fear echoed louder. By 1976, the pace of Freddie's life had become punishing. Chico and the Man was still a hit, but the workload behind the scenes was relentless. Long shooting days blurred into late-night rehearsals and promotional commitments. The laughter on screen concealed a growing exhaustion off camera. Sleep became irregular, anxiety became constant. Freddie began to feel trapped by the very role that made him famous. Chico Rodriguez was beloved, but Freddie feared being typecast, boxed into a character he could never escape. Friends recalled him worrying that the industry would discard him once the novelty faded. The fear of becoming irrelevant haunted him, even while he was at the top. At the same time, his personal life was collapsing. The separation from his wife turned into a bitter legal battle over custody of their son. Court documents, depositions, and attorneys became part of his daily reality. For a young man already overwhelmed, the legal pressure felt suffocating. He believed the system was stacked against him. Every court appearance reinforced the sense that he was losing control over his own future. The emotional toll was severe. Freddie spoke openly to some friends about feeling empty, disconnected, and deeply depressed. He confided fears that went far beyond career stress. There were moments when he expressed thoughts about death, not always directly, sometimes masked as dark humor, sometimes dismissed as exaggeration. In retrospect, those comments sound like warnings. Substance use intensified. Drugs and alcohol became tools to quiet his thoughts, to manage insomnia, to push through obligations. In Hollywood at the time, this behavior was not unusual, and that made it even more dangerous. There were few interventions, few conversations about mental health. The expectation was simple: show up, perform, smile. Adding to the weight was a haunting family history. Freddie's father had died by suicide years earlier, a trauma that lingered beneath the surface. Those close to Freddie later said he feared inheriting the same fate, even as he felt powerless to stop it. The idea of history repeating itself became a source of quiet terror. Professionally, tensions mounted. Freddie felt increasingly isolated from decision-making around his own career. Contracts were complex. Creative control was limited. He was young, inexperienced, and surrounded by older executives whose priorities did not always align with his well-being. The show went on, but at a cost. By late 1976, friends noticed changes in his demeanor. The sharp wit remained, but it was uneven. His mood swung unpredictably. Some days he was energetic and hopeful. Other days he withdrew, barely speaking. There were moments when he talked about wanting everything to stop, not fame, not work, but the constant pressure. The collapse was not sudden. It was incremental. A missed night of sleep. Another argument. Another court document delivered. Another obligation piled onto a schedule already stretched beyond its limits. Each small crack widened until the structure holding him together began to fail. In the weeks leading up to his death, Freddie Prinze was not just struggling. He was unraveling, and while the warning signs were visible in hindsight, they unfolded quietly, behind the laughter track of a nation that believed he was living the dream. The final descent was already underway. The only question left was how quickly it would reach its end. In the final weeks of Freddie Prinze's life, the pace did not slow. If anything, it became more suffocating. The legal battles with his estranged wife intensified, drawing him deeper into a maze of court hearings, custody disputes, and legal strategy sessions that left little room to breathe. Each development felt like another loss of control. Friends later recalled that Freddie seemed haunted by a sense of inevitability. He spoke less about the future and more about being tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. He canceled some social plans, stopped returning certain calls, and spent more time alone. When he did appear in public, the familiar charm was still there, but it flickered, as if powered by a dwindling source. Work offered no refuge. On set, he remained professional, hitting his marks, delivering his lines, keeping the show running. But off camera, he struggled to connect. Conversations were shorter, laughter came harder. The gap between the character America loved and the man behind it grew wider with each passing day. there were signs that something was deeply wrong. Freddie confided to a few close friends that he felt overwhelmed by the custody fight, terrified of losing his son, and paralyzed by the feeling that every decision was being made for him. He worried about money despite earning more than ever before. Legal fees mounted. Contracts locked him into obligations he no longer felt capable of fulfilling. Sleep was scarce. Insomnia plagued him. Some nights, he barely slept at all. Others, he relied on substances to shut his mind down, even temporarily. Those close to him later said that his thoughts often spiraled late at night, when the distractions of the day fell away and the fears had room to surface. In the days immediately preceding his death, Freddie's behavior became more withdrawn. He made fewer appearances. He spent long hours alone in his Los Angeles apartment. He spoke on the phone with friends and family, but the conversations were often vague, unfocused, as if he were searching for reassurance without knowing how to ask for it. There were moments that, in retrospect, felt like quiet goodbyes. He expressed love for his son with unusual intensity. He spoke about wanting peace, about wishing the noise would stop. Nothing he said sounded like a clear plan, but the emotional weight behind his words was unmistakable. On the night before his death, the pressure reached its peak. Legal frustrations, emotional pain, and exhaustion converged into something unbearable. Those who spoke to him sensed despair but did not grasp how close he was to the edge. In an era without widespread awareness of mental health crises, his suffering went largely unaddressed. By the time the 29th of January 1977 arrived, Freddie Prinze was running on empty. The young man who had once thrived on applause now found himself isolated, overwhelmed, and unable to see a way forward. The final hours were approaching not as a sudden shock, but as the culmination of weeks of mounting despair. The stage was set, the laughter had faded, and the clock was moving steadily toward a moment that would change Hollywood forever. The final day of Freddie Prinze's life began without ceremony. The 29th of January 1977 arrived quietly in Los Angeles. Another winter morning in a city that rarely slowed down. What is known, from police reports and accounts given later, is that Freddie spent much of that day alone. He was in his apartment, a private space that had gradually turned into a refuge and a trap. There were no public appearances scheduled, no studio audience waiting. The familiar structure that usually governed his life was suddenly absent. According to those close to him, Freddie's emotional state was fragile. He had been sleeping poorly for days. His thoughts were consumed by the custody battle and the sense that everything important to him was slipping away. He felt cornered by legal obligations and haunted by the fear that he would lose his son. The future he had imagined success, paired with stability, no longer felt reachable. As the hours passed, there were phone calls. Some were brief, unfocused. Others carried a heavier tone. Freddie reached out to people he trusted. Though not always directly asking for help, he spoke in fragments, circling around his distress without naming it outright. To those on the other end of the line, he sounded upset, but not necessarily in immediate danger. Late that night, the apartment grew quiet. Outside, Los Angeles continued its restless rhythm. Inside, the pressure that had been building for months narrowed into a single moment. At some point, Freddie Prinze picked up a gun. The exact sequence of events remains painful and stark. A single gunshot shattered the silence. Emergency services were called. Freddie was rushed to UCLA Medical Center, critically wounded. Doctors worked through the night, but the damage was catastrophic. There was nothing they could do. Shortly after midnight, Freddie Prinze was pronounced dead. He was 22 years old. There was no note, no clear explanation left behind. Only the echo of questions and the sudden absence of a life that had burned too brightly, too quickly. For those who loved him, the news felt impossible. For Hollywood, it was a shock that cut through the illusion of glamour and success. And for the public, it marked the end of a story that few realized was already nearing its tragic conclusion. The final hours had passed quietly, behind closed doors, but their impact would resonate for decades. In the days that followed Freddie Prinze's death, grief quickly gave way to scrutiny. Police reports confirmed the immediate conclusion: suicide. A self-inflicted gunshot wound, no evidence of foul play. The case, on paper, seemed tragically straightforward, but for many, the explanation felt incomplete. Friends, family members, and fans struggled to reconcile the official findings with the image they knew. Freddie was young, successful, a father, a rising cultural figure. The idea that he would deliberately end his life clashed violently with the version of him that appeared on television screens every week. Almost immediately, questions surfaced. Was it truly intentional? Or was it an accident fueled by exhaustion, substances, and emotional instability? Some close to Freddie pointed to his substance use and erratic mental state, suggesting the possibility of impaired judgment rather than a clear desire to die. Others insisted he had spoken openly about feeling overwhelmed and hopeless, and that the warning signs had been there all along. His family's reaction added another layer of complexity. Freddie's mother publicly rejected the suicide ruling, arguing that her son was not in his right mind at the time of his death. She pointed to his history of depression, substance use, and overwhelming stress as evidence that he was incapable of forming intent. Her grief turned into determination. In a highly unusual move, she filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Freddie's psychiatrist, alleging that negligent care and overprescription of medication had contributed to her son's mental state. The case dragged on, reopening wounds and reigniting debate about responsibility. Was Freddie failed by the medical system? By Hollywood? By everyone around him? The lawsuit ended with a settlement, but not with closure. It raised uncomfortable questions about how mental health was treated in the entertainment industry, especially for young stars under extreme pressure. It also challenged the idea that suicide is always a simple, individual choice, rather than the end result of a web of influences. Media coverage reflected the uncertainty. Some outlets framed Freddie's death as a cautionary tale about fame and excess. Others focused on the lack of support structures for performers barely out of adolescence. Comedians began speaking more openly, albeit cautiously, about burnout, depression, and the fear of being discarded once the laughter stopped. For fans, the debates did little to ease the pain. Whether intentional or accidental, Freddie Prinze was gone. The arguments could not bring him back, but they did expose a deeper truth. His death was not an isolated incident. It was part of a larger pattern, one that would repeat itself again and again in the decades to come. Even as the official narrative settled, the discomfort lingered. The questions never fully disappeared. And perhaps they never should have. In the years after Freddie Prinze's death, something quietly shifted. The laughter he once brought into millions of homes did not disappear, but it began to sound different. What had once felt effortless now carried an echo of loss. Chico and the Man continued briefly without him, but the absence was unmistakable. The show had been built around his energy, his timing, his presence. Without Freddie, the illusion of light-hearted entertainment collapsed. It was a reminder that behind every character was a human being, and sometimes that human was holding on by a thread. Over time, Freddie Prinze came to represent more than a talented young comedian gone too soon. His story became a reference point in conversations about mental health, fame, and the cost of success at a young age. Long before such discussions were common, his life and death exposed the vulnerabilities hidden behind celebrity. His son, Freddie Prinze Jr., would grow up in the shadow of a father he barely knew but could never escape. In later years, he spoke openly about the impact of that loss, about the weight of legacy. and the determination to build a life defined not by fame alone, but by stability and choice. In that sense, the story did not end in 1977. It carried forward. Looking back from the final hours, Freddie Prinze's life feels like a warning written in hindsight. Not about ambition, or talent, or success, but about what happens when those forces move faster than the support systems meant to protect the person at the center of it all. In his last night, there were no cameras, no applause, no audience waiting to laugh. There was only a young man, overwhelmed by expectations he never had time to learn how to carry. Freddie Prinze did not leave behind a manifesto or a final message. What he left instead was a question, one that still lingers decades later. How many bright lives burn out in silence, long before the world is ready to listen? In slowing down his final hours, we are not searching for someone to blame. We are being asked to remember, to look beyond the spotlight, and to recognize that sometimes the most tragic endings are the ones that unfold quietly while the world is still laughing. Fade to silence.